Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today we're going to be trying out another recipe from Claire Saffitz's cookbook Dessert Person. This time we're going with one of the advanced options. We're doing the Croquembouche. So this is a tower of cream puffs. So this is a very difficult recipe. There are a lot of sub-recipes involved here, so it's a little bit complicated, a lot time consuming. I'm a bit intimidated, to be perfectly honest, but I'm really excited to see how it goes. But without any further ado, let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to make is the Craquelin. This is a little cookie that will sit on top of the cream puffs to give it a nice round appearance and a crackly texture. For that, I've got 1 stick of unsalted butter. This is room temperature. To that, I'm going to add some light brown sugar. And using just a spatula, we're going to cream this all together. Probably could have used a larger bowl, but that's all right. Okay, cool. So that's been about 1.5 minutes of stirring, and I think that this is looking pretty creamy and smooth. Never creamed butter and sugar by hand before. Always a good reminder that you don't need a stand mixer necessarily to make these recipes. Now here I've got some AP flour and a little pinch of kosher salt. And now we're just going to carefully fold this together to get that flour incorporated into the butter and sugar. I really should have gone for a larger bowl here. All right, and this flour is getting pretty well incorporated. I think we're nearly there. So I think this is looking pretty nice. It looks very sandy. It's quite a dry mixture. So I'm going to switch over and just go in with my hands and knead this a couple times just to ensure that everything is getting really well incorporated. So you can see it's very dry and crumbly. This is not like a typical cookie dough. All right, and so this dough is looking nice and evenly incorporated to me. So now we can go ahead and split this in half, and we'll pop it onto some parchment paper to get it rolled out. All right, so we need to get this rolled quite thin. So we're looking for 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to tap this down just a little bit to get us on a head start to being where we want to go. And I think that's looking pretty good as far as thickness goes. We're looking for 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to pop this in the fridge and then we'll roll out the next bit. That looks good as well, so I'm going to pop this in the fridge to chill also. All right, so this dough has been in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes, so it's firmed up just slightly. It's not going to be hard to the touch, but I think it should be a little bit easier to work with. So now what we want to do is take our 1-inch cutter. Mine is actually about 1.25 inches. Whatever you've got that's approximately 1 inch will work. You just want everything to be the same size. So I'm going to start over here and I'm just going to kind of go down and twist. You want to put these circles as close together as possible so that you don't have to re-roll a ton. Obviously you can re-roll these scraps as many times as necessary to get to your 70 circles. And Claire says in the Croquembouche recipe that this step is optional. If you didn't want to do this cookie piece, you could just brush the top of the cream puffs with some egg wash while you're baking them. If you're only going to make a Croquembouche once a year, you might as well just go all out for that one time you make it. All right, so I'm carefully removing these using my offset spatula. Transfer them to a plate or a cutting board, just anything that's transportable so you can pop it back into the refrigerator. We're going to store these in the refrigerator until we're ready to bake the cream puffs. So that's 6 by 6, so I've got 36 here. And in total, we were looking for 70, so I think we're going to be pretty much spot on after I re-roll the scraps here. So that's exciting. I'm just going to go for it and try to go straight through without chilling again. We're just so close, I really want to keep this process moving. Cool, so this yielded about probably 75-ish or so of the little crackling cookies. So I'm going to pop this into the refrigerator just to keep them cold until we're ready to bake. All right, so it is the next day. I needed a mental health break after last night ruining 3 separate batches of caramel. I kept having the sugar crystallize. I don't know what was causing it. I've made caramel numerous times with no issues whatsoever. So I'm attempting again today, switching up my strategy a little bit. I'm using a recipe for caramel that Claire posted on the Basically website a while back. The only difference here is that there's some cream of tartar added. So in with my sugar mixture here, I've got the exact sugar that Claire called for, the exact water that Claire called for, and I added in 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. So cream of tartar is an acid that helps inhibit the recrystallization that you get in caramel signs. So I've used this recipe, I used it most recently at Thanksgiving actually for my a caramel apple tart that I made, and it worked flawlessly. I am going to continue stirring this mixture until the sugar is dissolved. So when the sugar is dissolved, this will go from this milky white appearance to a clear liquid. And once it's clear, we're going to stop stirring and we will swirl only. So after 45 minutes, we are at kind of somewhere between a dark honey and maybe that light amber color. We're trying to take this to a deep amber. So at the 55-minute mark, we're seeing this kind of very deep amber color. I think we've probably got another 5 or 10 minutes left on this. All right, so we have just hit the 1 hour mark on this caramel. It's hard to believe how much fun we're having. The color has definitely deepened up. So this has been going for an hour and 5 minutes. I'm really liking the color we've got here. It's got a nice kind of deep amber look to it. So at this point, I've got my smallish heat-proof bowl, and we're going to very carefully pour this scalding hot liquid into our heat-proof bowl. One thing I do want to note, you know I'm a big fan of scraping pans. I did not scrape this deliberately because in the event that there was any undissolved sugar that had recrystallized out and stuck to the bottom, you don't want to scrape that into your caramel mixture because then that will cause recrystallization to happen when you take it out of the pan. All right, so we are finally ready for assembly. I've got another batch of caramel on the stove. We're gonna need that once we finish dipping everything here. A couple things to call out. We've got the cream puffs. I made these yesterday, so I did keep these in the refrigerator overnight since they were already filled and they do have dairy in the filling. Not ideal, but my mom did it all the time growing up and I'm still alive, so I'm okay with that. Number two, got a thick glove here. So this is a brand new like dishwashing glove. It is heat proof or heat resistant because this is super hot, obviously, so you don't want to burn yourself. If you don't have a brand new clean one of these gloves, you might want to buy some disposable latex gloves that are powder free. That's what Claire called for in the recipe. Sugar burns are not fun, and at least this way you're having a barrier between you and the sugar. So I'm right-handed, so I'm only using it on my right hand, but if you wanted to use both hands just to be super safe, by all means do that. Let's go in here and see how this goes. So I'm going to go in face down and coming up. And so you can see that the caramel is really running off. It's super liquidy at this point, and you can also see that I got my fingertips directly in the caramel, so it's a good thing I'm wearing gloves because that would have definitely hurt. Truly, getting the cream puff off your fingers after dipping is kind of a challenging bit. Which I hadn't expected it to be, just because you can't really get your hand underneath it to offload, so you're kind of left relying on your non-dominant hand. Perhaps it is a good strategy actually to wear a glove on each hand. It would make me less scared of integrating my left hand into this process. And as I'm dipping, I'm trying to get that full Craquelin circle dipped down into the caramel, just so that it has an even kind of texture across the top. And already this caramel is kind of setting up. I don't know if the change in viscosity will be really noticeable on camera, but I can definitely tell the difference as I'm pulling these out of the caramel. It's not running straight off. It's kind of hugging on to the tops of the cream puffs just a little bit more. And it seems like I'm running a little bit low on this caramel, so I'm going to try to go more quickly and not quite as generously on the surfaces here. All right, so I'm gonna call it there. This little bit of caramel that's left I don't think is enough to really dip anything. So in total, I've got about 12 of my 70 cream puffs that didn't get this caramel topping on it. So not ideal. However, I don't know if all of these will be needed for assembly. We're gonna get this cleaned up and then I'll be back when we're ready to build the croquembouche. So we've got our second batch of caramel here. The cream puffs have been drying, so let me show you what these sound like. So the caramel on the top is really set up, it's nice and hard. Now we are ready to assemble. So I've got my little spinny Lazy Susan for cake decorating. On top of that, I've got one of these cake rounds lined with aluminum foil. This is a 9 or 10 inch round. And so we've got 11 puffs as the base. And so we are going to get assembling. So I've generally laid my cream puffs out from largest to smallest. They're all approximately the same size, but there is some variability there. What we're gonna do is take the cream puff, dip one side into the caramel, and we're just gonna hold this until that sugar sets up. And it should only take a couple seconds. Cool. He's starting to tip. He's not quite there yet. And I'm trying to angle these in slightly to think about like the shape of the croquembouche is going to taper inward. Let's go on to layer 2. So you want to continue around in the same fashion, and now we're going to be placing these into the gaps. So I'm taking the glove off. I don't think it's really necessary for this step. I'm not getting really close to the caramel, and this way I think I'll be able to assemble more quickly using both hands. You can tell I'm getting a little bit impatient here. Day 2 of croquembouche is not as fun as day 1 of croquembouche.
Oh no.
All right, so we had a jumper. That's okay. I pulled him out. I'm using the fork to just kind of hold him in place while everyone else gets set up. I was not prepared for that. So you can tell that I'm kind of adjusting as I go. You can see that the layers will kind of flare out as I'm working. However, they're kind of cooperating with me and getting back into alignment. It'd be nice if we had like braces for this or something to kind of hold everything in place, but we're making it work. Okay, so I'm really not happy with this right now. This is super frustrating. The caramel's hard to work with. It's either too runny or it's setting up too much. I'm going through it way too fast. I'm gonna have to make another batch before this tree's assembled. It's supposed to be 8 tiers tall. I'm 3 tiers tall and already it looks like a cluster. So I'm just really not happy with this right now, but that's okay. We're gonna just keep powering through it. This thing's a disaster. Don't love this lump that's on the back of it, but I think aside from that lump, it is coming along. All right, so I just can't go on with it being lopsided and looking like garbage. So trying to cut this apart. I'm gonna have to make more caramel and just kind of do this whole thing over. All right, so I've got a fresh batch of caramel. I kind of disassembled some of the bit that was really protruding out as much as I could. It just wasn't really sitting right with me. So hopefully we can get this wrapped up. I mean, it could look worse, to be honest. Like, it doesn't look great. It could look worse. That is the full assembly. I'm just gonna continue holding here and make sure that everything sets up, and then we can start with the kind of drizzle of caramel around the outside. I think we can make the threads to drizzle around the outside. I'm gonna pick this up, and once it's a thin thread, just kind of wrapping this around, and you can see that it's kind of flowing slowly enough off of the fork. And you can actually pull a little bit more quickly here, and it'll kind of stretch itself as you go. So if you go slowly, you can let it droop. If you want to go a little bit faster, it'll kind of stretch. Just imagine if this were nice and conical, this draping and drizzling would work out really, really well. Right now it's a bit of a struggle since I've got a slightly irregular tree shape, but I think that's okay still. Okay. And with that, I think we are finally done with the croquembouche. So I'm going to get cleaned up a little bit and then we'll give this a taste. About 9 hours of work later, this is the finished product of the croquembouche. Overall, I really do like the appearance of this. I think it's really pretty. It's definitely a wow. If you were having a holiday party, this is a centerpiece. It's gorgeous. Before we get into the tasting, I do want to give you a few tips and considerations that I learned the hard way making this. First, be really purposeful in how you split your time across 2 days. I kind of defaulted into a second day because I struggled with my caramel. However, going back, I would say make your pastry cream, make the pâte à choux dough, and make the craquelin all the day ahead of time. That way on assembly day, all you need to do is bake that stuff off. Baking the cream puffs is like 30 minutes. Super easy. Filling the cream puffs, another 30 minutes. Super easy. And then that leaves you a lot of energy and mental energy to take your time assembling this, because that's where I kind of struggled. Number 2, if you struggle with caramel, just add the cream of tartar. 3, take your time. Don't have yourself up against a tight deadline here. The caramel will set when the caramel wants to set. Don't let caramel setting up in your measuring jug be the kind of thing that drives you to try to rush yourself. So the caramel reheated really easily in the microwave. Final bit around assembly, break out your cream puffs into groupings by row that you have planned here. So if you're planning out 8 rows, map that out and actually isolate those cream puffs. That will make sure that you keep your rows tapering inward and you can be a little bit more organized. So those are my tips. I hope that they're helpful. It was a lot of work. However, I made it a lot harder on myself than it needed to be. So if you value your sanity and your loved ones and you don't want to yell at people, heed my warning. And I think you'll have a good time with this because truthfully, it wasn't hard. It was just time consuming and I ran out of patience. All that said, I'm dying to dig in. I'm gonna grab one of these little guys off of the foot of the croquembouche. I am gonna just bite into this, I guess, and let's see. Cream puff delicious. Pastry cream, outstanding. The texture of the dough is so nice. Really happy with how this puffed up. The caramel on the top, it's a little bit tacky. Kind of like sticks to your teeth a little bit, but not in like a necessarily bad way. It adds a little extra snappiness, which I appreciate. I do like a good texture contrast. So realistically, I probably won't make another of these unless I'm doing some holiday entertaining and having a big group of people over. It's 70 cream puffs, right? So do the math. I think this feeds at least a dozen, maybe more. So if you have a group of people, I think this is worth the while. For me, this year in my apartment, no, not so much worth the investment of time, money, sanity to create this. However, it is quite tasty. So if you're in a situation where you have a crowd to feed, by all means, go ahead and make this. So I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.